Beware, citizen, you are now departing from the world of allowable opinion. The Tom Woods Show.
Welcome, everybody. It's Wednesday, August 6th, 2014. And today we're talking about the tiny house movement with Jay Shafer of Four Lights Houses. Jay Shafer designs tiny houses. How tiny? We'll ask him in just a minute. He's the author of the Small House book, which is credited with launching the tiny house movement. And just today, just this morning, I see a link on Drudge to a story about the tiny house movement. This thing is really gaining steam, despite the fact that until a listener of this program emailed me and said, you really should have this guy on, it would be an interesting conversation, I didn't know anything about it. So let's welcome Jay onto the program. Jay, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Tom. Good to be here.
I first heard about you because a listener emailed to say you should have this guy on. He's got an interesting story, and you could talk to him about the tiny house movement. And my response was, I have no idea what on God's green earth you are talking about. So I Googled this topic, and apparently it's everywhere. Like, everybody knows about it except me. So before we get into how you get into this, I want to make clear my listeners understand just how tiny is tiny. The house you live in right now, how many square feet are we talking about?
Well, the house I live in right now is palatial by the standard that I've been going by for the last decade or two, because it's 500 square feet for four people. Before that, I was living in 100 square feet for over a decade, and I love living simply.
All right, there's so many follow-up questions here, but I want to start with your own personal story. What would make you decide to do something like this?
Well, my therapist would have maybe some other answer, but I would say I just didn't want to be saddled with the burden of a 30-year mortgage and the heating bills, and not to mention just the stuff and the space and the whatnot that goes along with more than one needs. So I built myself a very little house in 2000 to live in, and with my modest grocery store salary, or wages at that time, I was able to pay it off within a year.
And then this became a phenomenon now, and that I want to get to in a second. But what impresses me about this is that so many people looked at this and said, yeah, this is something I think I'd like to do too. Now, did you expect that would be the case?
Well, I was hoping it might be at least a little bit the case. You know, I figured if it seemed a bit crazy pushing tiny houses in a country that really embraces big over everything else. But it seemed that since I was really into living simply, there might be others, and it turns out that there is almost a universal appeal when it comes to very small, simple, efficient houses. If people don't think they can live in them, at least they're very interested in the idea.
Well, I'm certainly interested in it. I don't think it's something for me, but I am very interested in it as a phenomenon. I'm interested in, for one thing, a lot of practical questions. When you say 500 square feet or 100 square feet, these aren't 500 or 100 square feet that you'd see in a typical American house. You are extremely efficient with your use of that space. Give me a couple examples of how you're able to make the most out of what most people would consider to be an extremely small space.
Oh, I to be honest, I think it's my OCPD finally paying off. I'm just really obsessive about making small spaces work, so I will sit there for literally hundreds, if not sometimes thousands of hours designing a tiny house to ensure that every inch is doing something. I guess I have a real predilection towards wanting to see meaning in everything around me. So every house has to mean something, and everything within every house I design has to mean something. And I guess it's that drive that gets me, makes my stuff efficient. It's just because I can't stand anything else.
Well, I know I've seen, I don't know if this is in your houses or not, but I know I've seen cases in tiny houses, for instance, where, well, certainly people are sleeping up in a loft, so you make use of space up up in the air. But then also in the bathroom, I noticed that the toilet will be in the shower area, and you have a curtain that keeps the toilet from getting wet when you take a shower, that kind of thing.
Yeah, there are a few spots in the house that are extremely, they tend to be a little harder to get, or they're not very efficient in the standard American house. So, if you do what's called a wet bath, common in other countries where the toilet is in the shower is the bathroom, then you don't have to make extra space for that. Putting the bed up so you're using more of the vertical space and saving the horizontal space, that's great. And one of my favorite things I've designed as of late is a tub that's only 2 feet by 2.5 feet. So it's more vertical, like a Japanese-style tub, and that is really a space saver.
When I started looking into your background before we had you on, there was one statement you made that when I heard it, I said, my listeners are going to like this guy. And it had to do with being allowed to live in a house of this size. And you said something along the lines of, as soon as I found out I was not allowed to live in a house this small, that's when I knew I had to do it.
That's true. I don't play that point up very often, as often as I probably should, but I probably would never have decided to live simply if it weren't for the laws that prohibit living simply in this country. When I found out that the housing industry and insurance industries have created the building codes that almost every city in the nation now uses as a minimum size standard for housing, I thought, gosh, I don't want the industry to decide how much of their product I'm going to buy. So I am going to find some loopholes here and live very small. It's kind of like civil disobedience, but it's very comfortable civil disobedience. No tear gas, just living simply and comfortably.
But apparently a loophole around this is if you have wheels on the dwelling. Is that right?
Yeah, that's one of the easiest loopholes to find is if you can call it an RV or a vehicle, you don't have to meet those minimum size standards for a house.
Even if you don't necessarily really in practice drive around with it.
That's true. It's not very often that I actually pull my house around. It's on wheels. In fact, most of the people I build for and most of the people living this way don't move their houses that often. It is just a way to accommodate the codes, I guess just be barely legal.
Now, you were saying that there are building codes. We're all familiar with them. And I think these have been presented to the public as codes that are meant to improve people's welfare and to prevent people from being taken advantage of, to make sure that everybody has what the industry considers to be the bare minimum that's necessary for a happy life inside a house. But as you say, and as we tend to note on this program, there seems to be a bit of a conflict of interest here between the industry and the fact that the industry, and the codes, of course, the industry would have an interest in making sure that the codes require all kinds of amenities, or in particular, large square footage, because that means they get to build more, that means they get to sell more. I mean, do you look at it as a deliberate attempt to promote the self-interest of the industry, or do you think it's just good intentions gone awry? What do you think's going on?
Oh, sure. There's probably a little bit of consciousness in it, but I don't think it's either consciously evil or not evil. It's just the way nature is. It's just a self-serving entity or organism, and It's probably not that it's set out consciously, or maybe it is. I have no idea, but I can say that one way or the other. If you allow somebody to do something, of course they're going to just wind up doing it, consciously or not. These codes serve the industry, so of course they're going to just happen. And I don't know if it's a mean thing or a money-making thing. It is ultimately, and yet it taxes people incredibly. And 2008 was a great example of that. It's like people cannot afford to live in more house than they're forced to live in, if that's not really what they wanted in the first place.
Did you, in fact, notice an increase in interest in tiny houses after what happened in 2008?
Yeah, it seems like every business was struggling, and yet our business was doing a little better at that time. And since then, it's just continued to improve.
You mentioned that you had grocery store wages at one point, and now you're actually involved, as I understand it, in designing these houses. How did you make the transition from living in them to realizing that you had a niche here and a talent for actually designing them?
Well, actually, the design part came first because I was closeted in my tiny house design thing for a long time. It was one of those things that didn't really seem to serve a purpose, but it was a great way to procrastinate doing laundry or anything else. So I would design very small spaces, and then at some point I just came out and decided to make it happen in my own life and show other people what the ideas were. So the design part was the first part, and then actually turning it into a business was. I'm not a business type, so that's the challenge. Actually, selling houses.
But apparently, you've had some success. I mean, you were on Oprah more than once. I won't give away what you told me on the phone today, but there seems to be a growing interest in what you're doing.
Yeah, it is growing. It seems exponentially. It's like every year I think, oh my gosh, this thing has gotten so much bigger this year than last year, and it's because it's true. Every year it seems like more and more people are catching on to the idea. And this last month or two is particularly good because it seems to be going a bit more mainstream, which is good because it needs to get out there. And there's a couple of TV shows coming out now, and so people are getting the idea.
Well, what about the idea of using one of these, if not as your primary residence, then maybe as something you might live in when you're on vacation?
Yeah, a lot of people do that. You know, I design the houses to be primary residences, but that doesn't mean that people don't buy them for other purposes. So maybe a third of the folks who buy my houses buy them as sort of a vacation home. And another third actually put them in their backyard as an extension to their existing home because they may need another bedroom because their house is too small for that extra person. And then that last third is the folks who live in them full time.
I think one question that might be on people's minds is how do you entertain when you have so little living space?
Well, you either live in California like I do and go outside to entertain, or you rent out the entire Holiday Inn on a weekend with all the money you saved on a mortgage. Really isn't having a huge party.
With all the money you saved on a mortgage. That is very, very good. No, but you must, though, when you're reaching out to the general public, surely, as you say, there seems to be growing interest in this and sympathy for it, but you must run into some resistance or objections. What would be the most common reasons people say they couldn't possibly do this?
Well, yeah, I've been very lucky that I haven't met with much direct resistance, like from the industry or from anybody. It actually seems like maybe it's being embraced there because people see that there's a market for it. But the one thing I do hear a lot, which is almost all the time, is it's a great idea, I love it, but I couldn't do it myself. And one thing I like to remind people of is that a small house is not really just, the 100 square footers I design. I design bigger ones too, but it's just using whatever space one has very efficiently so that every inch of whatever space one occupies is actually being used. So I think it's a great idea for everybody. Just got to assess what your needs are in terms of being happy and move into the right size space instead of one that's actually guzzling a lot of your resources unnecessarily.
When I look at a movement like the Eat Local movement, local community-supported agriculture, when I look closely there, I notice that in recent years it's no longer a homogeneous group of people who are involved in this. It used to be people who just happened to be, let's say, very environmentally conscious, or were interested in organic produce or meats where the animals were raised a certain way. But now these days, it seems like a whole bunch of people. There are soccer moms interested in it. There are Ron Paul libertarians interested in it. It's a very diverse group of people. Now, what about the tiny house movement? Is this more or less a very homogeneous group, or do you find that it's all walks of life who are showing interest in it?
It's the most all walks of life thing I've ever seen. In terms of, it's just, it's funny. I really expected it to be sort of a libertarian, maybe liberal sort of clientele. But it turns out that everybody understands the basic message. It may be in a different way. So some folks, I've gotten some really interesting requests from folks. Gun turrets on the roof, bulletproof walls, whatnot. So there are all sorts of different ideas for how to use a structure. But I do get, I get called by very conservative media, very liberal media, all the in-between media, and it's because their audiences apparently seem to appreciate it.
Well, tell me, in a 100-square-foot house, I walk into that 100-square-foot house, what do I see? What's in there? What is it stocked with?
Well, I always try to shoot for the universal human needs because it's so hard to know what anybody in particular is going to need. So I always assume I'm going to live in the house because I'm fairly average, even though there's no real average person around. And so I include I include a bathroom, a kitchen, a living room, and a bedroom, and a lot of storage. Storage is very important in a small space. And so, and within those areas, I usually include the basics that you would find in any other house, just smaller versions of them.
Now, if we go to your website, now tell us, is it fourlightshouses.com?
That's right. Yes, fourlightshouses.com.
If people go there, they're going to be able to see exteriors, interiors, both of these houses?
You can see exteriors, interiors, anything you want. And once you're online looking at tiny houses, be careful because if you're like me anyway, it's like addictive house porn. I can get sucked into all sorts of websites featuring tiny house stuff.
Well, ever since the internet came along and you can look inside people's houses on real estate websites, I'm always so curious that you're right. I can't keep myself from it either. You wrote something called the Small House Book. How many years ago was that?
I wrote that. I started that book before I even started building my first house. I started that when I lived in my test run, which was in a 100-square-foot Airstream trailer out in the woods. Not quite enough insulation for Iowa, but I started writing that and spent, I updated it every once in a while, so I guess that work is never quite finished. But maybe 20 years ago, I started writing about the merits of living smaller.
So somebody reading that house is going to be reading, reading that book is going to be reading a small house manifesto, or is it also going to give them tips on how to live in this way?
I tried to make it the Be Everything book within a small book. Of course, it's small. It's called the Small House Book, and so it's a little bit of each. It's really mostly the manifesto, the philosophy, a little bit of a biography in there about how I got into it and my experiences. And, there's a little bit about how to do it. Well, there's a bit in there about how to build a small house, and for that matter, how to design. Everything small is in the book.
You said at the beginning you didn't have much of a sense for business, or this isn't what you would naturally imagine yourself doing. How does a guy like that get noticed by Oprah more than once?
I think it's I've been very fortunate in stumbling upon the perfect storm in terms of media attention because it turns out the media likes cute pictures with good stories, and small houses are perfect fodder for imagery, and there are a lot of great stories behind the small house stuff. So it's good because the message goes along with those particular personal stories.
Are you always working on new designs for houses, or have you more or less settled on a series of templates that you're happy with?
I thought for sure I'd be done designing houses by now, but it seems that it's never ending. Like the ideas for making an even more efficient house are just never ending. So this year I think, I've designed the perfect house. It's the most efficient house ever, and I'm sure 5 years down the road I'll look back at it and think, oh my gosh, I could have done a lot better than that. But yeah, I think it's probably it's just the way I love spending my time, so it's unlikely that I'll ever stop.
Is there a part of the country where this movement seems to be most concentrated?
Seems like it's most popular in expensive areas, so like the two coasts, East Coast, West Coast, and any other like urban area or near an urban area. The problem with, I guess, why they're probably not as popular in places like, places where real estate isn't as expensive is because, you can buy a mansion for $60,000 in an area. Why would you buy a tiny space for the same price as what I know why. It's because the long-term costs are much higher on the big house, but it's an easier sell where people understand the value in efficient space.
Well, I find this all very interesting, and As I say, it's something that was completely under my radar. I was not aware that it was even happening. I love discovering things like this, things that are huge that were not part of my world at all, and yet are out there, and a lot of people are interested in them, and they're out of the mainstream, but yet, oddly enough, becoming mainstream. So it kind of sounds a little bit like my own show. Well, Jay, I appreciate your time. I want to send people over to visit you. So it's 4, spelling out the word 4lightshouses.com is the best way to look into what you're doing?
That would be it. Yes, the internet, that's the way to go.
All right, we'll put a link to that in with the show notes for this episode, and people listening can go ahead and type it in and see what you're all about. I appreciate your time today. Best of luck with it.
Thank you so much, Tom. I really appreciate the time.
All right, that's it, everybody. Remember, a couple quick things. August 15th, you can see me in Nashville, Tennessee. Get details on that at nightofclarity.com. October 25th, I'll be in Boise, Idaho. I'll have details on that coming up soon. I suppose many of you guys have heard the announcement about the Peter Schiff Show, which is coming to an end at the end of this month as a Monday through Friday program from 10 a.m. to noon Eastern. He is looking to shift into podcasting, into a once-a-week program, maybe 2 hours long. So keep an eye out for that. He'll be making further announcements about that over the course of the month over at schiffradio.com. I'll tell you what I got coming up the rest of the week in just a minute, but remember, if you're enjoying this program and you like what's being done here, consider becoming a supporting listener for as little as 5 smackers a month. You get transcripts of all the interviews, plus a bunch of discounts around the internet, so it's like AAA. It pays for itself if you use it the right way. Plus, I'm going to be adding a lot of goodies to this thing very shortly. Homeschool courses that I've developed for the Ron Paul Homeschool Program for people who are at the higher levels of support. All kinds of fun goodies, including my next book that will be out. The Kindle version will be available to you guys at no extra cost, plus the audio book, and I got a whole bunch of things cooked up. So if you guys like what I'm doing here, check that out at supportinglisteners.com. All right, so what's going on this week? Tomorrow we've got Anthony Gregory, finally. Anthony got married, which is why we couldn't have him on. It was a long story. I was going to have him on, then something came up, and we couldn't have him on. So then he couldn't come on because then he was getting ready for the wedding and all that. So now we've got him on. We're going to talk about George Bush, terrible president. George W. Bush, terrible president. Because we get so preoccupied with whoever the current president is, we sometimes lose sight of the important insight of how terrible his predecessor was. So that's coming up tomorrow. Then Friday, we're going to talk to Jeff Taylor once again, but this time about his experiences in 2012 as a delegate for Ron Paul at the Republican National Convention. I'm sure there'll be a lot of interesting stories to relate on that front. Thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks for subscribing on iTunes or Stitcher at TomWoodsRadio.com, spreading the word about the show, sending that TomWoodsRadio.com link to your friends and family. We sure appreciate that. Thanks for listening. We'll see you tomorrow.
The Tom Woods Show.